Most of my work is focused on neuroscience and spiritual formation. I really like the practical aspect. And like I just mentioned, the dissertation is almost complete. Hoping to defend later this semester, graduate next spring, and especially it's important because today we had my wife and I had our doctor's appointment. We're expecting our second child with a name wrong. So I really doubt much dissertation work will be done after that happens. So I really need to get done before that. Before I came here to GTU, I worked many years for the Denver Rescue Mission as a chaplain and pastor to homeless addicts. What we'd do is we'd take the homeless and addicted out of the urban setting, move them an hour out of the city off to a farm. Practically, that way if they get a craving, it's a long hike. So you're kind of stuck here. And then they would be put in charge of running this farm for 1 to 2 years. Getting job training, counseling, a whole gamut of rehabilitation. And I was really inspired by the question of who succeeds and who fails. I could never predict who would succeed. I remember one gentleman who was pretty much a spiritual star, mentoring other students, doing everything he needed. And it was his graduation day. Everyone on the graduation day gave a speech to all the current clients, plus their mentor and church community would come to see him graduate. He gave a speech, and so this guy stood up in front and said, "You know, only chumps work when there's Social Security. Crack and Jack Daniels in Las Vegas calls me. I'm out of here. See ya." He got into the car that was gifted to him for his graduation. Drove off, and I never heard from him again. That was like, okay, so what is going on in a person's brain? They seem to have been doing everything they needed to, but yet this happened. Of course, that was rather devastating to everyone, including the current clients. So what's going on in a very damaged brain, and how does this dovetail with spiritual content? Neuroscience and spiritual formation. I call this talk often practical neuroscience for the pews. 2 programs for change. Like Bob mentioned, I look at both rapid conversion and the gradual kind. The brain can accommodate both. I call that the Saul to Paul program. This is what every addict wants. It's like, I want to just be able to pray and be free from addiction tomorrow. I've seen it happen, but it's extremely rare. It's like, no, sorry, you're on the Jacob program, where you have to work for 14 years under someone you don't like before there's a change where God changes your name. This is the long-term gradual program, and most people are on that one. A question, and where I used to work, there was for those that have heard this before, don't give the answer. There was a certain percentage of clients, about 10 to 15% of my clients, that would have a serious craving every 14 days, and only every 14 days, like clockwork. We just set our watch. Day 14, bam, there goes their craving. Any ideas why?
Hormone cycles?
What?
Hormone cycles?
No. Good question. Good guess. Yeah, Ted knows.
They get paid every 14 days.
Bingo. These were the addicts that kept a job. And so they were used to getting their paycheck every 14 days, immediately going out using, and their brain had wired their internal time clock to that cycle, even though they had been without a job for a long time. Their brain still responded to that time cycle. More formation and neural connections. With gradual change in the brain. The rapid stuff, it's very technical, we'll skip over that. The gradual stuff is what most people have to deal with. 2 little pithy statements that are very common in the literature of neuroscience is that neurons that fire together wire together. That means 2 unrelated things. If they happen at the same time, your brain takes both of those things and can lock them together. An example would be your internal time clock to using and the addictive feelings that come with it. Or another good example is my wife and I dated for years long distance before we got married. She was finishing up in seminary. I was already working at the rehabilitation facility. And she asked, could I borrow your books on John Wesley? I'm taking a John Wesley class. I said, sure. And so I made a package, a people care package, threw the Wesley stuff in there. And I thought, oh, it'll be kind of cute. I'll put a little of my cologne in the package so when she opens it up, she'll smell it and think of me. It'll be so cute. And so I mailed it off. And later on, when we next saw each other, I go and give her a hug, and she goes, all I can think about is John Wesley. Throw that cologne away. I was like, well, that didn't have the effect I wanted. My cologne became wired to John Wesley in her brain. And I had to get rid of it. Another statement is use it or lose it. If you're not using certain neural pathways, they will weaken and pretty much go by the wayside. But the ones that you do use become very strong, like you're working out. More on that a little later. It brings the question, how do we replace, strengthen, inhibit, and encourage the formation of new neural pathways? Making your unconscious work for you. You have all this literature about the secret of your unconscious. Most of what is in your unconscious mind was what was in your unconscious mind in the past. It was in your conscious mind. You create your own unconscious. Example, driving. When you first learn to drive, you have to pay attention to every detail. Once you learn it, your brain says, okay, now I can put that on autopilot, shove most of the driving skills into your unconscious mind, and now you can drive home on autopilot. You only have to pay attention when something surprising happens. You've created an aspect of your own unconscious mind. In character formation, if you're not practicing virtue, you can't expect it to become part of who you are. In a very common example given in neuroscience, your brain is like a snow hill. So you got fresh powder, and that go out to ski. When you first start, you can pretty much choose, or sled on the snow hill. When you first go out to sled on this fresh snow hill, you can sled anywhere you want to. But after a whole day of sledding, you've created some very deep ruts. And to sled somewhere new is going to take a lot of effort because you'll pretty easily fall into the tracks you've already created earlier in the day. Your brain is like that in terms of creating neural connections. When you first start learning to drive, it's your fresh snow hill. Learn something wrong, well, that's going to be your deep groove you always fall into. How you choose to live has a structural and functional effect on the brain. See an example of this. They've studied taxi drivers and musicians a lot. And they have different brains than people that aren't musicians or taxi drivers. And this is because, well, when you're a taxi driver, you have to use spatial memory, spatial navigation, and the whole area of your brain develops for that. So they become very superior at spatial navigation. It's not they were born with a special taxi driver brain and that was their destiny to be the world's best taxi driver. It's by doing it, they've created themselves a different brain. Musicians too. Practicing music will give you new areas of your brain. They haven't tested this, but I wonder, is practicing virtue the same way? And continued action creates automaticity. That's the term they use in the literature, where a deliberate behavior they have to think about becomes an automatic habit. You can create your own determinism. You can create your own habitual problems. Good news is the unconscious is never fixed. One takeaway, form it the way you want, and then it will not take conscious effort to do what you want to do. They pose a question. Some people that they would consider an ethical exemplar. People that are these wonderful role models and examples. How could you have rescued all those people during the Holocaust? And well, I couldn't do anything differently. I had to. They had trained themselves in such a way that another option didn't even occur to them. It was just automatic. I have to help. If you think of in the news a year or two back, there was a mass shooting in an Amish community, and everyone was struck by the act of forgiveness that the whole community came and showed to the person that did a mass shooting on their own children. And people were shocked. Like, the Amish are so otherworldly, they have the superpower of forgiveness. But what they neglected to mention is all the lifelong forgiveness exercises that an Amish community practices from the time they're little that made that kind of powerful act of forgiveness possible. So anyone could be that type of forgiving person, but how have they trained themselves to? To change habitual unconscious patterns takes time and emotional struggle. So if you don't do it right the first time, and you've created some ruts that go where you don't want them to go, it'll take time and emotional struggle to change them, but any effort of resistance helps. We had clients, I called them the connoisseurs of fine rehabilitation programs. They were on their 7th, 8th, 14th rehab. And it's like, why not just shake the dust off your feet and write this guy off? It seems like he's playing the system. But you never know when that is going to click. And they say on average it takes about 7 rehabs before someone gets it. And even if you resist and fail, that little act of resistance strengthens the different neural path. A little bit more, and a little bit more. The other one is still a lot stronger. It's going to take a lot more work to weaken it up, but every act of resistance helps. I included 2 studies. Imagination, I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, is very powerful. In the first study, the Journal of Neurophysiology by Pascal Leon, tested people practicing music. And they say, for piano practice, this group, do nothing. This group, sit on your hands and only imagine your fingers over the keys. And you, that group, play for real. And they found the same exact improvement between the imagination group and the real practice group. And this one is wild. The last one, the Journal of Neurophysiology, they did the same experiment, but they told this group, sit on your rear end and do nothing. You, sit on your rear end and think about exercise. Don't actually exercise, just think about it. And this group actually go to the gym and exercise. And they found that the people who merely thought about exercise improved about 18% from their baseline. And those that actually exercised improved 30%. So it's not as good as real exercise, unfortunately. But the imagination actually improved their physical fitness when they did nothing else but think about it. And so then, what are the implications then for life change in terms of your imagination? And attention comes with training. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. I'll give an example of a client I called Jerry. He came to us from 20 years in prison for an armed robbery. And pretty much, he likes to punch people all the time. Someone looked at me wrong, smack. They said something wrong, smack. Thing is in prison, if someone insulted you and you didn't react, you basically told them you were lower on the pecking order and you were inviting yourself to be taken advantage of later in very bad ways. And so, at any type of slight or insult, you had to hit and hit hard. And then you stayed on top of the pecking order, and people didn't bother you. That served him well in prison, but that trained his perception so that once he was out, he saw insults where there weren't any. Because that was how he was trained. If you become highly skilled at using a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. You hear that in psychology, and it's very true. In practical application, Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's literal. Neurons change. I mentioned the imagination. In the neuroscience literature, there is absolutely no difference to your brain whether you are imagining an action, seeing someone do it, or actually doing it yourself. The brain has no difference in terms of how it changes and forms. So what does that tell us about What do we think about? What do we imagine? If you're trying to help someone form spiritually, are you just giving them the trolley problem? That's not something they're likely to encounter in everyday life. Or you're having them imagine themselves in ethical situations. Doing, seeing, the same for your brain. And that's why we tell our clients, sorry, you can't watch rated R movies while you're in rehab. Mostly because of this reason. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with it, but you can't be watching Train Spotting and hope to not worry about your addiction issues. Train Spotting, movie about addiction. Ethical formation. Preoccupation and thinking about a behavior, even in the context of how to avoid it, can mean its reinforcement. So right now, whatever you do, don't you dare think of a purple bunny. Everyone here just thought of a purple bunny. This is my problem with Alcoholics Anonymous. People stand up in front and say, I'm so-and-so and I'm an addict. They spend so much time saying, I'm an addict. Well, if you think about that, what neural pathways are you strengthening? The addict one. And so in the very act of, I must not do this, I must not do this, you're actually enforcing the neurons for that addiction instead of actually weakening them. With this very act of, I must not do it. A better way is to think of something completely different. So instead of standing up and saying, so-and-so and I'm an addict, why don't you go out and do some active service, help somebody. Think of something different. Rethink moral dilemmas. Use imagination on those things. Service learning of qualifications. Neurons that fire together, wire together, I mentioned. A lot of places figure, and you see this especially in high schools, they require service learning. And they should expect, we're going to send someone out, you go serve at the homeless shelter, you'll have a great experience, you'll come back and you'll be more likely to do that in the future. Not really. Where I used to work, our clients could often be rude, ungrateful, and mean. The first time I showed up to work at the addiction center, someone looked at me, and my welcome was, who the bleep are you? Some people can often have very negative experiences in service learning. You need a reflection component added into it. And so you can take negative experiences and through reflection, work them in such a way that they actually can think about what does it mean to serve, what is the nature of rewards. And if you only serve those who are grateful, you're probably missing out on helping the people that need help the most. So without reflection, you can wire negative experiences to the active service. You never want to do it again. But with reflection, you can take the negative experiences and wire them in an appropriate way so that the person's not turned off from doing good later. Role models need to be relatable. They found that the brain really only engages when the role models are relatable, meaning same socioeconomic, same race, in terms of your role models. Most of the time, that's when the brain really engages and starts to form. Or if the role model's not relatable, no engagement, no motivation, the brain does not change. Another example, pastoral counseling. Another type of neurons wiring. Memories of trauma become linked to traumatic emotions. But in a safe counseling setting, or even with just a safe friend, if you're able to tell and retell your painful story, the nerves that have linked between the pain and the situation, the safe feelings then become wired in and bypass the pain. And so by retelling your story in a safe situation, a new wiring occurs, and so you can now start telling your story without the same type of trauma feelings flooding back. My own personal take is, in the Bible, Jesus says, if you think about it, it's a sin. So where's the line between a temptation and an actual sin when you're just thinking about it? This is my own little take, is that if just the idea of doing wrong comes to mind, that's a temptation. But if you hold on to the thought long enough that it starts to become part of your own neurology through your imagination, then that's when it crosses the line into a sin because you're thinking about it enough to form yourself. As one client put it, it was really easy to cheat on my wife because I already imagined it 100 times. Forgiveness. Anger is a natural response to being hurt, and so if you think about anger and that person long enough, every time that person comes to mind, anger is going to happen. It's become wired deep. And so, okay, what about forgiveness? Okay, I've forgiven them. Why do I still feel so angry? Well, it's wired in your brain. De-linking takes time, and forgiveness is a process to make new associations. So, act of helping the person, praying for them, can begin to move some more positive emotions into the linking. So if you don't stop feeling angry at someone when you forgive them, it's normal, because it's your biology. It takes time. Dark night of the soul. Just because you don't see any overt change in spiritual growth doesn't mean nothing's going on in your brain. A period of dark night could be the brain catching up and providing for and laying the groundwork for the next phase of growth. Here's an example, physical therapy. They used to think they train someone in physical therapy, you see how far you can go, and then you seem to hit a limit. And they figure, given your brain damage and the physical therapy we've given you, that must be the extent to which we can help you. And now you just have to learn to live with this level of function. In the last 10 years, they realized that, no, you can take someone to that first plateau, and they just keep doing it, and doing it, and doing it. They don't see any change, but they'll get to the next growth. They'll hit another plateau for months, and they'll hit the next growth, if they keep doing what they need to do. And so they realize, wow, we've been kind of shortchanging people, telling them their first plateau is the most they can ever do, when if they just keep doing their training, they'll have a next growth, and a next growth, and a next growth. There's even a couple examples where people have lost the majority of function in their brain, get back to fairly normal interaction in everyday life, but it takes years. They just don't give up at their plateaus. Neurons need time to consolidate for the next phase of growth. The practical takeaway, you can change any age and any time. Your brain changes throughout your entire life. It's not just, okay, at 20, your brain is set, and now all you have is the gradual decline into old age. No. Your brain is always creating new neurons, new connections, no matter how old you are. Have patience with change. Neurons take time. And be deliberate about thoughts and imagination, because that can help or hurt you. I had one client, when you get paid, what do you think of? I asked him. Crack and whores. And of course, then, whenever he'd get money, that's the first thing he'd always do. It's just automatic. Once I get a paycheck, that's just where I go. I don't know why I go into that door. Well, because he's had that link so deep. He had to do lots of imagination exercises. You get money. You go to the bank and you save it. You buy food, pay rent. Those are just never came to his mind. I'll conclude here. What about intellectual beliefs? In the educational field, they realized, Carolyn Dweck, she's at Stanford, she did an experiment on kids. She told one group that the IQ can change. There's nothing fixed about it. It's open-ended. With the right time and effort, anyone can have a high IQ. She told the other group, the traditional idea, IQ is fixed, static, you're born with a certain amount, that is your potential you can reach, and that's where you are. And then she did an IQ test on them, and then after a certain period of learning, did another one. They found those that believed that IQ could change actually had higher IQs. Those that they were told it can't, stayed the same. She said the difference was brain change only happened to those that had certain belief. The brain wouldn't change in those that didn't have belief in place. Believing intelligence is fixed or malleable alters IQ. They haven't done any experiments outside of this. But I wonder, how much do beliefs either foster or not foster brain change? Since it's a common mechanism in the brain, it probably extends outward in other domains and is worthy of research. So you can start brain scanning people. Okay, you're in this church, this doctrine. Did your brain change or not? You must move church. this one, I threw this on too, Transforming Love. This is just an interesting thing I discovered. Romantic love and parental love creates unlearning chemicals in your brain. That's why if you ever talk to someone that has recently fallen in love and realized, man, they're being dumb. It's biology. There's a lot of chemicals that get flooded into your brain that just help you delink very fast. Dissolves neural connections, even hard ones. From a practical standpoint, you're designed to be, when you get to know someone new, or you have a new child, you have to learn new behaviors very fast, and faster than the brain can traditionally learn. And so the very love floods your brain with these chemicals, so you can be on an accelerated learning program. You have a certain window. It happens to both men and women with new kids. Women first, and then the men usually come around 1 to 2 years. That's when their brains kick in with the unlearning. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean you can quickly pick up a new language during this period. It's meant for activity-type learning. But you wonder, they studied parent and child, what about other forms of love? Can love of God foster these unlearning chemicals? You see people in church that all of a sudden get really excited about everything. Is that their big window? How does one foster love? There's a whole model of the atonement where feeling the love of God should be transformative to a person as they begin to sense that, feel love themselves. And so is there certain optimal learning windows in terms of pastoral care where someone can foster the greatest amount of change because the learning chemicals are flooding around? And that's just a quick shotgun approach to all the different things that I'm looking at in my research. And do we have time for questions? Yeah, 2 questions, and then we can have more later.
I have a question. I had the pleasure of listening to your lecture in Ted Peters' class last semester, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I came and listened to it today because I'm just thinking so many more things. The people in your drug rehab center, they have problems, like all of us here have problems, right? They have stress, tension, whatever. They have issues. And in order to find the path to resolve them, they're using drugs. Because it's just real easy. You take the chemical and wow, I feel great. My problem is solved, right? And so that the person who gets, every 14 days, they're used to solving, quote unquote, their problem by buying drugs when they get paid. So I'm wondering, how did you change that method of finding resolution in your drug center with this type of idea?
It has to do a lot with delinking. I'll throw out another example.
Okay.
Long-term addicts get their high before they use the drugs.
I see.
And so the new addict, you have to you shoot up, you can feel high. The long-term addicts, their brain is rewired, and so the pleasure pathways have wired to the rituals that surround your drug use. And so the act of putting on the tourniquet, heating the spoon, you're feeling high already. But it's that type of linking takes a little while.
So
Or, I'm going to get into your question, or the middle, probably 3 years into my program, we decided to go down smoking. And I just made a little hand motion in front of a guy like I was packing down cigarettes, and he about had a fit. Just that little motion, like, oh, sorry. I was just testing a neurological thing, really exploring the subject. But it takes time. You have to deliberately do something else to link in something new.
Pleasurable, something else.
Something else fun, something else pleasurable.
Replace the old pleasure.
To replace the old idea.
As a new solution to solving that problem of anxiety.
Yes. And using drugs, that's not the root, that's the plant.
Right.
There's a lot of issues that feed into it, and so just from a practical standpoint of dealing with it, take care of the root. That could be family issues, financial issues, usually a whole lot of things, it's not just one thing. Lack of connection with other people, take care of that, then it's a little easier to handle the top. And you still have to handle all these neural links.
Makes sense.
And you got your hands too?
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned that anybody can change no matter how old they are, or how far messed up they've become. And you've been talking also a lot about virtue ethics, and I'm a little curious. Aristotle says towards the end of Nicomachean Ethics that the person who is too old probably can't change, probably can't become virtuous. And so are you saying that Aristotle is wrong?
On that point, yes. Virtue ethics really lines up with how the brain works. And I think he was right on in most things. But in terms of setting a cutoff date, no.
Does it become significantly more difficult?
Yes, it becomes more difficult, especially since a lot of change requires time and effort. And granted, if you're 85, your window for changing is smaller than someone who's 20. But the same type of effort, you can change. There's no real